It's now finally time to actually add any rows to my unlock collabs table, because right now it's completely empty. And there are two ways to do this, and I'll show the one I don't prefer first, which is where I have one query that uses an inner query, and afterwards I'll show how to make a temporary table that I can then use, and that makes it easier to do checking. As always, I want to first start out by defining a variable. In this case, I'll make that, and I need to remember to use the single quotation marks, which will be BJ Fujoshi, if I could spell that. And of course, this needs to actually be accurate. And that will then be the first query, which does nothing because it doesn't actually show anything. And to insert, I then want to use the aptly named insert into function, which takes my name of table. I then need to write the name of all of the columns, which I frankly don't feel like, so I'm going to cheat and say these are my columns. And I don't know if there's a way to avoid this. I'm sure there is. And then insert into, but what do I want to insert into? Well, I need to first do an inner query, which is to say select everything from, where my inner query will then be to likewise select everything from the all collabs table, which I'll call A, and I only want those rows from A, specifically the collabs column, that are equal to my variable. And then I'll order that by index, because I'll return 2 rows and I only want one, which in this case will be the first one, because I'm ordering it ascending by index, and then say limit 1 to only get the 1. At this point, this would insert a row into my table, and then in order to show it, I can say semicolon, and then say select everything from the table. And I want to check if I do have to write that public dot in front of all my tables or not, or if I can just write it like this, because that would be a lot nicer. Which means I want to first comment all of this out, so I just run this part. I just want to see, because I'm curious. No, okay. But I want to show, not this part actually, I want to show the inner query, and this is why I don't prefer this method, because as you can see from my formatting here, I want to have the inner query like this, where I can just add the double dashes to make these comments, which means I can run this part, because this returns exactly what I want. I wanted to find the collab called BL Fujoshi, which is this one row, and I don't have the duplicates, and then I want to insert into, but this inner table then returns the one row where I'm saying I want to select everything from this query, and what I want to do with it is then to insert this one row from the table into this table. And just to make it visible, I want to run this at the end. So I'm using the semicolons to say that this is one query. And then afterwards I'm saying select everything from unlock collabs to show it. And then if this works, I should get the one row. And of course it didn't work, because I keep thinking this is called unlocked and not unlock collabs, which I guess is a mistake. And I found it hard to make any changes to any table after I've made it, which makes it clear you need to really think carefully about the columns and the names and the order of the columns. But this does exactly what I want to do. And if I then run it again, it gets mad. And this is the benefit of having the keys, because the key, that is the index in this case, that already exists. So you can't add it twice, which is why I don't have to do any further testing or checking or anything to this code. Because if you try to add a collab that's already been added, you'll just get an error, which is very convenient for me. So if I delete this, actually I want to copy that because I'll need it later. I just select that, then I get my one row. With this method, you have the inner query and the outer query, and I would like to make it easier for the user to see what the inner query produces, which I can do by making a temporary table. So if I change this to another collab, it would probably be easier to just delete that. And to make my temporary table, I want to first check that if the table already exists, which I'll just call temp, if this already exists, I want to delete it. And then if it doesn't exist, well, then nothing happens. And I want to create a temporary table, which I then call temp search. And that should be just as before. I want to select everything from the all collabs table, and I'll call that A, where a.collab is then equal to my variable. And again, I want to order it by index to avoid duplicates and to only get one. And this then produces my table, but I don't actually print it. So I could say select everything from my temporary table. And I want to make a line break, and then I get this. And then of course I want to then drop the table afterwards so it doesn't exist, because after I run this code, the temporary table exists and I don't know exactly how that works, if that gets deleted later on or how it works, but I do want to add then afterwards here the exact same line to drop the table if it already exists, which it does because it's made up here. So this should still work, that I print that and then I delete it right after. And with this method I can very easily visualize the inner table and confirm that everything is the way it should be, which is very nice both for the developer and user, because then I can do exactly what I did before, which is then the insert into. And again, I'm going to cheat because I don't want to write out all those columns, and I want to select, and it's now clear to me that when I run it like this with the drop table at the end, it doesn't actually print my table. So for now I want to comment it out. But this is as before. I want to select everything from my temp result, because this has already been filtered, which I do up here, filtering it on the Collab and reducing it to one row based on ascending index. And then I want to drop the table, and this also needs a semicolon because this is a query in itself. It's simply saying take everything from temp result, which is one row, add that into this table, these columns in that order. Then it deletes the table that I created up here after it's been used. And then I want to select everything not from temp search, but from my unlock collabs. And now I have two rows, which is exactly what I expected, because I've added it once with the inner query and once with the temporary table. And I would definitely prefer using this method because it's easier to show as the user what's going on. And it's easier for you to add comments so that you only run parts of the code. So I will keep that because now I want to delete rows instead. And in order to delete all of the rows, that's very easy, and you probably do not want to do that in real life. Let me just select everything from the unlock collabs table, my two rows, and then after that I want to delete everything from the unlock collabs. And then before I execute it, I then want to select everything again, which should then give me an empty table because I have deleted everything. And of course then this means I need to now go back and add rows, so I can show how to delete one row at a time. So now I've added wrapdog again, and we can say beautiful Joshi again, just to have two rows, because you probably don't want to delete the entire table. Well, all of the contents, you're not deleting the physical table. You're not doing drop table, which would be a terrible idea. Instead, I want to delete a single row. In this case, I do want to delete beautiful Joshi because I know it exists in there, which means again, I can say delete from, but I don't want to delete everything. I want to delete only those rows where a collab, in other words, this column, the value in this column is equal to my variable. And then I want to return everything, which this is a bit weird for me. This returning everything. This returns the one row I just deleted. So this isn't the resulting table because it wouldn't have beautiful Joshi, it would have wrapdog. Using this returning asterisk would then return everything after I've deleted it. Because if I now try to run it again, well, I've already deleted beautiful Joshi. So it will give me an error, which is also a bit convenient. I do want you to not be able to delete something that has already been removed. Because beautiful Joshi can't be found, it can't be deleted, because here it won't be able to return anything. But I could delete wrapdog, because that still exists. But again, if I repeat the code now, because there is no wrapdog in the table, I'll get an empty table. Okay, fair enough. I've added 4 collabs to my unlock collabs table just to have a few more rows. I now want to do a count of how many rows I have. After that, I can then count how many collabs do I still have left to unlock, because that would just be a subtraction. And that is actually easier than I kind of expected, because it's just to count everything from my unlocks table. So SQL doesn't always have to be difficult, because this gives me exactly what I wanted, a count, and it is very, very fast, which also makes sense considering how small the dataset is. And in order to do a count of then the difference between the number of rows in all collabs and the number of rows in unlock collabs, I had to ask the internet, which was nice enough to give me an answer from this thread, how to subtract the amount of rows from one table, which also uses a kind of inner query setup, meaning I want to first count all of the rows, but not all rows, just the distinct, because again, in the all collabs table I have duplicates. I have 2 rows for each collab where I've swapped around weapon 1 and weapon 2, meaning I don't want to count the rows, I want to count the distinct. I could just divide the count of collab by 2, but that feels a bit like cheating. And from that number I want to subtract then parentheses, because this will be an inner query. So I guess I could do like that. My inner query then being select the count, just as before, count everything from the unlock collabs table. I kinda accidentally forgot to hit the record. And once again, I'm getting tripped up because I used a capital C for this table, but a small c for that one, which stresses how important it is that you check names before you do anything. And this will then give me a new column with a confused name, but if I simply say as difference, as it suggests in this thread, then I get the name of the column to be difference, which is fine, I guess. There are now 2 things left that I want to do, which is to get information for not all collabs and not the unlock collabs, but the subtracted collabs. In other words, those that I don't have yet, because they will not exist in all unlock collabs, which means I want to do a left outer join. The trick here is that again, in all collabs I have duplicates, which means I need to do a grouping, and that means I have to do the minimum and maximum, which I'm frankly a bit too lazy to not just copy paste, because I want to do a grouping on the collab to get the minimum index and then minimum and max of the 2 weapon columns. I need to have one column be min and one be max so that I get the opposite weapons. And then it doesn't matter if I use minimum or maximum, because it will only return one value. And that is from then all collabs as a. Then I need to do a left join on the unlock table where I use the collab column to join on. And then I want to skip the part where I then filter, because I want to show what the output will be before I do this, because that would just be a normal left join. So I want to group by a collab, and I want to order by a collab. That will then give me a table that goes ascending alphabetically from the collab column. This would give me the 23 rows, which is what I want, and then it's done a join on my other table, but those aren't visible because I haven't set to show them. Because I don't actually want to see the joins, but if I just show it, I could do it like this. And here I also have that problem where the columns have been called min, min, max, min, min. So I'd have to go like here. I'd have to go in here and say as, and then whatever I want it to be called. But I wanted to show, since I'm doing a join, I can get, well, the corresponding row. But here I have some nulls. I can only find this collab and this collab and this collab. And everything else returns null. And that's what I'm going to be using in my where clause in order to do an exclusive join. You'll also see that the weapon underscore 2 column is now called weapon 2 because I've specified that up here. But because I don't really need this table, I'm not going to go and add this as to all of my columns. So from this, I then want to add my where clause, which is simply that I can use any column really, because as I showed here, weapon type would give either a valid value or null if you can't find that value, which means I can simply say that, well, in this case I'm just using collab because I think that makes sense given the context. So I can say I only want to see those rows where the B table, that is the inner table that I'm joining on, where that is equal to null. And that should then have me go from 23 rows to 19, which is exactly what happened. So this is an exclusive join. So the only trick really is this portion. And if you remove that, it would just be a normal left join where you get all the rows from A and only the corresponding information from B. Which means there's one thing left I want to show, which was doing the grouping on weapons with remaining collabs. And you could solve this with a temporary table, but I'm not going to do that right now. And I'm only interested in the weapons, so I'll only select the weapon 1 column. Here I'm doing a grouping on weapon 1, which means I want to add that way at the bottom to group by weapon 1 and also to do an order by count, but I want that to be descending, so you get those weapons that have the most unlocked collabs left to get. And here's where I'm going to have that inner query, And here I want to first select all rows, but I need to still do that exclusion where I remove the collabs I've already added. Meaning I want to select everything from all collabs, and I'll call that A. And then I need to do that exactly what I did before, my left outer join. So to do a left join on unlock collabs, and then I need to remove those rows I can actually find. And I'll call that B on A.collab equals B.collab. And then I want to only grab those rows where the B collab is equal to null. And here I've worked on debugging this, and from what I can tell, it's getting mad that the weapon 1 can refer to both the B table and the A table, inner table, because these column names are the same, and I can solve that with the annoying method of manually having to write out, instead of saying this select everything, then manually writing out all of the column names. And there's more trouble brewing, because it now gets mad if I say b.weapon1 and b.count, because it can't find the table B, and that's simply solved by down here removing the reference specifically to the B table, even though I've defined the table up here as being B, and I'm saying select B weapon 1 and count B weapon 1, but whatever makes SQL happy. That will then give me exactly what I wanted, 16 weapons, and they've been sorted in descending based on the count. And I can't exactly explain why it gets mad here. If I specifically refer to the B table, yeah, it works for weapon 1, but B.count, it doesn't. And the best explanation I can give is that the weapon 1 column is native to this query, meaning if I were to execute it, I did that in the wrong order, meaning if I were to execute this, if I do the inner query only, then here I do have a column called weapon 1, which means I can reference it by saying B, but I add the count column afterwards, so it doesn't explicitly exist within the B table. It's like a calculated column that doesn't exist in B until I add it. That would be my best explanation, which means I'm allowed to say order by the B column, but I can't say B.count because count doesn't actually exist within B, it's added afterwards. That's my best explanation. But that was the last thing I wanted to add, and yeah. Yep.